I was told my family had to choose between me and my ex-husband. Guess who they picked? I'm Layla, I'm 34, and I'm a public radio producer who spends 10 hours a day deciding which voices get to be loud and which ones fade under music. And I didn't realize how literal that job had gotten until the afternoon my mother called to say, in the tone reserved for bake sale logistics and death, that the family had to choose and they were choosing Daniel because he's been such a blessing to us. Which is a sentence that feels like someone turning down your mic while a stranger delivers your lines, and I remember looking at the waveform of an interview on my screen, peaks and valleys, breaths like soft little mountains, and thinking, those are my lungs, that's my story, this is my show, and then the audio blurred because my eyes did the swimmy thing they do when your body refuses to be professional another minute. You can tell a lot about a person by what they carry in their tote bag. Mine has a battered field recorder, 3 pens that all work but only if you shake them first, a notebook where I write overheard lines like a magpie, and a handful of breath mints even though I spend most of my day alone in a room with a microphone. Daniel used to joke that dating me meant our arguments could be cut for time. What he didn't say out loud was that he liked being on air, he liked the way my family lit up around him, the way my mother called to ask his opinion on phone plans and my father saved plumbing problems for when Daniel can swing by, as if the man came out of the womb with a wrench. He's the sort with a face that photographs well and a voice that sounds like it's always reading the part of reasonable. When we met, I thought that competence smelled like safety. It took me 8 years to realize competence without kindness is just control with better shoes. Daniel is a civil engineer, which means he builds things you don't think about until they crack. He liked to tell people he made invisible safety like bridges that don't fall. In our marriage, that translated to, I will control variables until the world stops scaring me. I'm not immune to fear. I was raised Catholic by a mother who still keeps a spare rosary in the cutlery drawer. But my fear usually asks for a list, a nap, and a sandwich. Daniel's wanted an audience. If you've known a man like that, you know the rhythm, help that arrives with footnotes, generosity that demands a publicist, support that is a thin scarf thrown over possession. He never yelled. He edited me. Do you really want to say it like that? He'd ask at parties, with his hand on my elbow like a gentle comma. He loved that I worked in radio, he said, because I understood tone. He meant not too sharp, not too loud, not too much. We married when I was 26 in a courtyard that smelled like orange blossoms. I remember my mother's smile cracking in the sun and my father's tie slightly wrong and my brother Jamal dropping a ring. And I remember the feeling that everyone was relieved I had chosen someone who could fix a sink. We were good for a while. He packed lunches with notes like a high school movie boyfriend. He learned to cook exactly one thing perfectly, mushroom risotto, lots of stirring, lots of compliments. He called my boss to surprise me with a day off once, which I thought was romantic until I realized I was being arranged like furniture. The first real fissure wasn't a fight. It was a Sunday morning when I said I couldn't go to church because I had an edit due. He kissed my forehead and said, "We can make choices that bring us closer together or ones that make us alone," and then he left slowly like his disappointment might follow me down the hall and do the dishes. My family adored him. Some of that was him. A lot of it was us. Daniel did the kind of small heroics that loom large inside a house. Set up my parents' Wi-Fi when Dad couldn't find the password. The password is literally taped to the router, I said once, and Daniel laughed like I was cute. Changed my mother's smoke alarm batteries before they beeped. Fixed the squeak in the sliding door so my father could stop swearing about it in the middle of the night. He coached my nephew's soccer team because he couldn't watch the drills be wrong, and my sister No cried when he taught her son to tie his shoes with a mnemonic that stuck. He brought boxes to my cousin's move. He shopped Black Friday sales like a soldier on a mission and presented my mother with a Dyson vacuum she hugged like a grandchild. He was useful. Being useful buys you forgiveness in my family. I have been useful too, but my usefulness comes wrapped in questions and opinions, and you know how that goes. Our fault lines ran quiet for a long time. If you asked me to explain why I left, I could give you a scroll of small things you'd try to weigh against casseroles. But this is the short version. I discovered that Daniel had opened a separate bank account and redirected part of his paycheck there because you're impulsive with money, which is not only untrue. I buy secondhand boots and beans in bulk, but also a sentence that lands like a verdict. When I confronted him, he said the account was for the house, and then for our future, and finally, for emergencies in case you blow up our life. It was the you that did it, the way I was both the emergency and the imagined arsonist. We did couples therapy. He did homework like a valedictorian. He talked about repair and rupture and attachment styles until the therapist finally asked him if he realized he was building a marriage out of vocabulary and not love. We made it a year after that. There was no single explosion. There was erosion, the bad kind, the river undercutting the bank while everyone picnics. When I told my parents we were separating, my mother said, "Do you need money?" before I could finish the sentence, and then, "Are you sure you're not overreacting?" which is the other kind of currency. My father put his hands on the table like he was holding it down and said, "Marriage is work," as if I hadn't been clocking in for years. Daniel called them separately and then showed up with croissants on Sunday, and I watched my mother's face open like a window. He told them, "We're taking space," the way celebrities do when they're already 2 apartments away. He took my father to a Lakers game because he knows sports are the language men use to say, "Please love me." My brother asked if I was sure I didn't want to be taken care of, and I said, "I take care of myself," and he laughed like I'd told a sweet joke. The thing about being the competent daughter is that your competence disqualifies your pain. We divorced quietly. No screaming in the courthouse, no dramatic division of the record collection because we don't own duplicates of anything except towels. The judge stamped the paper and that was that. I moved into a 1-bedroom with a kitchen that looks surprised to be a kitchen. Daniel moved into a nicer 1-bedroom near the grove of trees where he runs to outrun the parts of himself that still chase him. He kept showing up at my parents' house like a package no one remembered ordering but no one wanted to send back. My mother called to tell me when she saw him. She didn't mean to hurt me. She thinks information is love. "He changed the oil in the Camry," she would say. "He's such a handy boy," and I would remind her that he is a man and also not my problem, and she would laugh like I was the one being dramatic. The first Thanksgiving post-divorce was the dress rehearsal for the ultimatum. I told my mother I wasn't ready to sit at a table with him yet. She said, "Be the bigger person," which I think is in a secret handbook they give mothers of daughters. I offered to come early and help cook and leave before others arrived. She said that felt awkward. I suggested 2 tables, one for people with boundaries and one for people without. She said I was being unkind. Then she said, "It's just 1 meal," and I said, "No, it's 4 hours of me stitching my mouth shut so other people don't have to feel discomfort." She cried. I stayed home. Daniel carved the turkey in a photo my aunt posted with the caption, "So thankful for this son in love," as if the hyphen could turn the knife soft. The call that changed everything came 3 weeks later on a Thursday while I was cutting an interview with a woman who had taught herself to make violins after a divorce. I was listening to the part where she said she loved the sound of wood, remembering it was once a tree when my phone lit up, "I'm home." I answered because I always do, because daughters who are old as children respond to the ring the way firefighters respond to alarms. "Layla," she said, "we had a family meeting, and I felt my internal organ-labeled dread sit up like a dog that hears the can opener." "About what?" I asked, and she inhaled like the pull before a Band-Aid. "About the holidays. And the wedding. Noah is getting married in March. Daniel is the brother of the groom's best friend." "Of course he is." We decided it's too complicated to keep managing 2 versions. The slight pause before versions did not go unnoticed. "Of who gets invited," she rushed on. "So we had to choose. For the peace of the family. For your father's blood pressure. For Noor. Anne. Layla, I'm so sorry, we chose to keep Daniel in the family gatherings. There are moments your life tries to make you theatrical." I did not drop the phone. I did not faint like a Victorian lady with a corset and a grievance. I sat very still and looked at the waveform on my screen, which was a stranger's voice and also mine, because in editing you become a vessel. "You chose my ex-husband," I said, "because I have learned to repeat sentences back when reality feels like a bad translator." "He's been so helpful," my mother said, crying now. "We can't lose him, he does so much, and your father needs the car running and no wants him to build the arch and an arch," I said. I didn't recognize my voice. "Yes," she said, grateful for a neutral noun. "With flowers. He has such a steady hand." "So do I said. I built your audio system, I manage your Medicare forms, I took you to your colonoscopy. It's not the same, she said. You're my daughter. You'll always be here. There it was. The economics of sure things. People feed the stray who might leave, they expect the house cat to feed herself. Is Dad there? I asked. She handed him the phone like a hot plate. Layla, he said, voice soft like a man who doesn't want to move furniture. I didn't vote. There was a vote. You know what I mean, he said. I abstained. You abstained from picking me, I said, and I could feel the old tight thread between us fray. He sighed. He fixed the leak, he said, and I pictured Daniel under the sink, the smug intimacy of a wrench. And after he took me to the cardiologist, he refused to let me pay for parking, my father added, like generosity was a dog that had jumped into his lap uninvited. He's a good man. He's a man who is good to you, I said. Those are not synonyms. My sister called that night. Noor talks like a woman who's driving fast, breathless, hopeful, making decisions in the middle of sentences. I swear I tried, she said. I told Mom I can't have a wedding without you. But Mark's family loves Daniel and he's in the wedding party, and Mom said it's too much drama and she offered you a seat in the back by the photographer. The staff table? No, she said, then admitted, kind of. So I could wave at you while your ex-husband gives a speech about resilience, I said. You're making it sound bad, she said. It is bad, I said. It's not just about me. It's about what they're teaching us. That men who are useful are allowed to hurt women, and the women should be gracious because lug nuts were tightened. She was quiet for a long moment. I want you, she said softly. And I also want a wedding where I don't have to manage a war. Then your solution was to choose a side, I said. Yes, she said and started crying. And it wasn't yours. If you're waiting for me to say I marched over and made a scene and everyone learned a valuable lesson, I'm sorry. I did not go to my parents' house. I did not send a mass text. I sat on the floor with my back against my couch and watched the light creep across the rug like it had somewhere better to be. Then I texted Zoe, who arrived with ginger beer and the kind of face you can rest in. She listened. She did not improve. That is the best kind of friend. Okay, she said after the first wave of tears did their good work and left the edges of the room less sharp. What do you want to do? I want to hear my own voice louder than theirs, I said. I want to be the person with the faders. She nodded. Then we will turn you up. Turning myself up looked like the kind of tiny, boring acts that get mistaken for nothing. I emailed Noor and told her I would not attend the wedding if Daniel was present in the wedding party, because I don't do seating arrangements where my trauma is a centerpiece. I told her I loved her, that I'd help with her playlist and her dress fittings and her bouquet trial, that I'd be at her door the morning after with breakfast sandwiches and a trash bag for her hairpins. She wrote back a novel of heartbreak and hope and begged me to reconsider. I didn't. I called my mother and told her I needed a pause. We'll talk once a week, I said. If you want to use the time to convince me Daniel is a saint, we'll try again the following week. She accused me of punishing them. No, I said. I'm protecting me. She hung up. I put my phone in a drawer and went for a walk like a person practicing a new religion. At work, I pitched a story about estrangement that wasn't tragic, about people who chose distance as a way to breathe. My editor raised an eyebrow. Too close to home? I smiled the way women smile when we declare a conflict of interest and also demonstrate we are professionals. I interviewed a woman who hadn't spoken to her father in 8 years and was happier than she'd ever been, a man who had lost his entire church community and found a bowling league where nobody asked him to explain his soul. I interviewed a therapist who said, sometimes love asks you to get smaller. You are allowed to refuse. I cut those words and looped them under a soft piano line and played them back 12 times until they glued themselves to my bones. The first holiday was brutal. Christmas at my parents' looks like a retail catalog and a potluck had a baby, too much everywhere loud. This year, I made a different plan. Zoe and I hosted an orphans brunch, which is what we call it even though none of us are orphans. We're just people with allergies to spaces that ask us to forget ourselves at the door. We wore pajamas. We burned the French toast and called it caramelized. I put up a string of lights I bought from a yard sale and lit a candle that smelled like cinnamon and luck. We did not take a group photo. When my mother texted, "Merry Christmas," Daniel loved the pecan pie. I turned my phone face down and refilled the syrup. My father's birthday was next. I sent a card with a stupid joke on the front, because humor has always been our truce. He called to thank me and then immediately began to tell me how Daniel had found him a cheaper cardiologist, which is the kind of sentence that makes you want to move to a hut. I said, "Dad, I will hang up if you mention Daniel again," and he did because boundaries repeated sometimes become walls that hold. He asked what I was working on. I told him about a segment on a retired lineman who keeps illuminating his neighbors' porches after storms. My father, accountant turned tinkerer, sighed with pleasure. "That's good work," he said. "So's mine," I replied. "So is telling your wife the truth that your daughter is not an appliance to be serviced." He chuckled. "You sound like your mother," he said, and I marveled at the way men can make anything into a compliment that erases the point. Noor's wedding came like a tide I could not halt. I sent her a letter instead of a toast. I wrote, "You are marrying a man who makes you laugh like you invented joy, and that is no small thing. I will not be there to watch you walk through the arch Daniel built, but I will be the one who takes your bouquet the minute you get home and puts it in a vase and takes off your shoes and feeds you strawberries and tells you every good thing you did today before you forget." She called me from the restroom of the venue, whispering, "I hate this," and I whispered back, "Me too," and we cried quietly like criminals. She sent me photos later, her shoulder freckled with confetti, our mother's lipstick too bright, Daniel in a suit like a well-meaning statue, and I looked at them the way you look at another timeline where you made different mistakes. 3 months later, the thing I had been bracing for arrived, not as a confession but as an accident. My mother's friend Lita called me from the grocery store to ask where the Cumin lived, and while I walked her past the turmeric she mentioned, casually the way people mention the weather, that Daniel had been paying my parents' gas bill for the last year. "Such a generous boy," she said, "always taking care," and the room did that tilt again. I called my mother. "You could have asked me," I said. "We didn't want to burden you," she said. "So you outsourced your need to a man who gets to buy your loyalty with utilities," I said. "Don't be crass," she snapped, and I heard it then, the click of her own survival. She was a woman who had been taken care of by her father, then her husband, now this man, because I refused to play that role. When I said as much, she went very quiet. "Maybe I don't know how to need you," she said finally. It was the first honest sentence we'd traded in months. "I can teach you," I said. "But you can't keep me as a sure thing and love him as the miracle." The pivot didn't happen in a church or a courtroom. It happened on a Tuesday when my parents' water heater died and Daniel didn't answer his phone. My father called me in a panic. I was on a deadline, but I drove over with a YouTube link and a willingness to swear. We sat on the basement step and stared at pipes like they were a hostile foreign language. I made tea because tea is a wrench for feelings. "I can call a plumber," I said. He wouldn't hear of it. The man who doesn't ask for help except from men has mythologized. I watched him try to be 25 with a 58-year-old back and finally said, "Dad, let me be useful," and he handed me the wrench like a baton he had been gripping too tightly. We fixed the pilot light. It felt like we had invented fire. He cried the way men cry when they hit something tender by accident. "I'm sorry," he said, "we handled it wrong." I didn't pretend it was enough. I did hand him a paper towel for his face and say, "It's a start." My mother's apology was not a single flower. It was a season. She started asking permission to tell me Daniel news. "May I mention him?" And when I said no, she would change the subject to jams, weather, the bird feeder. She brought me bags of clementines with the leaves still on and left them without staying. She texted me a photo of the arch with the caption, "It's just wood," and I felt something old unclench. She admitted finally that when I left Daniel, she felt like she had lost a doorbell, like she didn't know how to announce herself in my life without him as a translator. "That's an indictment of me," I said, "and of you, and of men," and she said, "I know," and I believed her because she had begun to use the word no like a plank, not a weapon. Daniel did not make it easy to hate him, which is part of why this hurts. He kept being helpful. He also began dating someone in my sister's friend group, which made him a permanent fixture in photos I did not ask to see. Once, after my father's cardiology appointment, he texted me to say, "Your dad needs you," like men think they invented telegraphs. I responded with a thumbs up, the international sign for go stand in the corner. He replied, "I miss us," and I stood in my kitchen and said out loud to no one, "You miss the us where I was adjustable." I did not text it. Not every truth needs to be thrown like a plate. The show we made about estrangement aired in May. The inbox filled like a sink. People wrote to say they had sat in their cars in parking lots to weep because it was the first time someone had told them they weren't monsters for choosing distance. One man sent a picture of a bowling league trophy. A woman sent a photo of her new porch light. My mother, who swears she doesn't listen to my work because it's too sad, called after and said, "I heard the one about the porch, and I waited for the lecture." "I think I've been asking you to be a light switch," she said, "on when I push you." I laughed, cry laughed. "You could ask me to be a lamp," I said. "Something you turn on with a chain," she said, and we laughed until we hiccuped because it's easier to learn when you have a picture to hold. In June, Noah invited me to her home for dinner with just us. She made a roast chicken that did not quite roast and a salad that was basically stars. "I'm pregnant," she said, and I nearly knocked the chair over hugging her. We cried. We ate. We mapped her cravings. Then she took my hand like we were 16 practicing eyeliner and said, "I told Mark if he wants Daniel at the baby shower, he can throw one of his own. The women are mine." I said, "You don't have to litigate me into your life," and she said, "No, I want you to see I can make a choice too." And for the first time in a year, I let myself imagine a backyard filled with women who know the difference between useful and kind. It would be neat to say my family chose me back. They didn't, not in a single stroke. They learned to choose truth in small pieces, and sometimes the truth was me. When my father's neighbor's pipe burst, he called a plumber and paid the bill and then called me to complain about the invoice and then apologized for using me like a gripe bucket. My mother began bringing Daniel's name into conversation like a test balloon. "Daniel said the tomatoes need more sun," she'd offer. "Tomatoes are stubborn," I'd reply, and that would be that. She told me once, quietly, that she had apologized to Noah for putting her in the middle. "I'm trying not to pick the easiest man in the room anymore," she said, and I kissed her forehead like a benediction. The last time I saw Daniel up close was at the farmer's market. He was holding a bunch of kale like a trophy. We did the polite exes thing, small weather talk, a comment about the peaches being early this year. He started to say something about my parents and I put up a hand. "No," I said, not unkind. "I'm curating my audio." He smiled, the old charming one. "You always were good at that," he said. "I'm getting better," I said. He nodded like a critic. "You're louder," he said. "No," I told him. "I'm the same volume. You were just standing too close to the mic. There are nights I go very quiet and the grief comes to sit with me like a cat, aloof, insistent. I grieve the version of my mother who never would have said we had to choose, the version of my father who could fix his own sink, the version of my sister who learned to host without triage. I grieve the version of Daniel who might have learned to let people be unscripted. Then I put on my headphones and listened to the raw tape of my life, a pan lid rattling, the neighbor's child squealing at a sprinkler, my own laugh in the middle of a story I didn't think I'd survive. I push the faders up and down and remember that, actually, I get to pick the levels. If you need a moral, I can't give you one that fits in a fridge magnet. But I can hand you a couple of sentences I keep in my back pocket for when the room goes weird. The first is something the violin woman said between takes when she thought the mic was off. "I always tell people it's rolling. I am not a monster. I didn't leave because he was awful. I left because I was disappearing." The second is what the therapist told a caller during a live show we taped at the library. When a family says they have to choose, sometimes what they mean is they can't bear the work of holding two truths. You are allowed to keep being true while they practice. I don't know if my family will ever be the warm, instant yes I thought we were. Maybe we were always the delayed, complicated maybe. I do know this. Last Sunday, my mother came over and sat at my tiny kitchen table with a bag of lemons and a recipe card in her grandmother's handwriting. She didn't bring news. She didn't bring a project. She brought a chair squeak in her face. We made lemon bars. She asked me to explain how a compressor works in radio, and I tried, and we laughed at our metaphors, and when she left she hugged me the way you hug a person and not a roll. After she went, I washed the bowl and put it upside down on the rack and stood very still and listened to my house. It sounded like a room that belongs to the person standing in it. It sounded like a show where the host knows finally where to put her own voice.